My name is Eleanor Vance, and at 68, I thought I had seen the full spectrum of human nature. I'd seen the delicate beauty in a restored masterpiece, the heartbreaking fragility of a fading canvas, and the meticulous patience required to uncover a hidden layer of paint. For 40 years, I had been an art restorer, my hands steady, my eyes trained to see beyond the surface, to discern truth from illusion. But nothing in my long career, no deceptive brushstroke or clever forgery, could have prepared me for the chilling calculation in my own son's eyes, or the casual cruelty of his words. "You'll die soon anyway. Mom, why not give it to us now?" That Tuesday morning, like countless others, began with the familiar rituals of my quiet life in Maplewood, Connecticut. The soft hum of the coffee maker, the gentle purr of my tabby cat, Jasper, rubbing against my ankles, the crisp morning air filtering through the kitchen window. I pulled on my comfortable walking shoes, grabbed my thermos of chamomile tea, and began my usual stroll around the neighborhood. Maplewood was a charming, leafy suburb filled with colonial homes and ancient oak trees. My apartment, a spacious ground-floor unit in a well-maintained brick building, had been my sanctuary for over 30 years, a place where memories of my late husband, Arthur, lingered like the scent of old books and dried lavender. It was filled with pieces we had collected over a lifetime: a grand mahogany bookshelf, Arthur's worn leather armchair, the antique writing desk where I often sketched designs for my restoration projects. Each item held a story, a whisper of a life lived with love and purpose. Arthur had been the bedrock of my existence. A quiet, brilliant architect, he'd supported my artistic passions with unwavering enthusiasm. When he passed 15 years ago from a sudden heart attack, a part of me went with him. But I had found solace in my work, in the meticulous art of bringing forgotten beauty back to life. My hands, though marked by age spots and faint lines, still held the steady precision of a surgeon, capable of repairing the tiniest crack in a Renaissance fresco or the most delicate tear in a Victorian tapestry. My reputation in the art world was solid, built on decades of painstaking work and an almost obsessive attention to detail. This was the world I inhabited, a world of silent beauty and historical echoes, far removed from the sharp-edged ambitions of my son, Marcus. Marcus was my only child, my joy, my challenge. He was a bright boy, driven, ambitious, but with a streak of impatience that sometimes bordered on ruthlessness. After college, he joined a rapidly growing tech startup in Silicon Valley, his career trajectory a constant upward climb. He rarely visited, citing his demanding schedule, but his calls, though infrequent, always ended with a hurried "Love you, Mom." I cherished those calls, clinging to them as proof that our bond, though stretched thin by distance and diverging lives, was still intact. Then Chloe entered the picture. She was Marcus's wife, a woman a decade younger than him, with an almost unnerving perfection about her. Her blonde hair was always impeccably styled, her clothes were designer labels I only saw in magazines, and her smile, though constant, never quite reached her eyes. She worked as a social media strategist, curating perfect online lives for wealthy clients. From our first meeting, I felt an unspoken tension, a subtle dismissal in her perfectly modulated voice. She'd compliment my apartment with a faint air of surprise, as if expecting something less refined from a woman of my age and profession. Her questions about my life were superficial, her interest fleeting, always quickly redirecting the conversation back to Marcus's impressive achievements or her own latest wellness retreat. Over the past year, their visits had become more frequent, but less about connection and more about assessment. Chloe would walk through my apartment, her high heels clicking on the hardwood floors, her eyes scanning every corner, every object, as if performing an inventory. She'd open cabinets, tap on walls, and make comments about optimizing flow or modernizing the aesthetic. Marcus, usually so absorbed in his phone, would occasionally nod in agreement, a strange, distant look on his face. I attributed it to their busy lives, their Silicon Valley mindset, their constant need for efficiency. I told myself they were just young, ambitious, a little too caught up in their own success to appreciate the quiet comforts of my world. I was wrong. I was dangerously, catastrophically wrong. The previous year, their interest had sharpened, veering into territory that made me increasingly uncomfortable. They started asking pointed questions about my finances, my retirement plans, the state of my health. Chloe, with her syrupy sweet voice, would say, "Mom, we just worry about you living alone here. It's so much space for one person." Marcus would chime in, "And those stairs, Mom? What if you fall? It's not safe. My apartment was on the ground floor. There were no stairs. It was a subtle, insidious manipulation designed to make me doubt myself, to make me feel vulnerable and incapable. I brushed it off, chalking it up to genuine, if misguided, concern. My inherent trust, a trait Arthur had always admired, was now my gravest weakness. My best friend, Margaret, a retired prosecutor with a razor-sharp mind and an even sharper wit, had tried to warn me. Eleanor, she'd said over our weekly tea, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. They're circling. I've seen this pattern before. They're not worried about your safety. They're worried about your assets. I'd laughed, dismissively. Oh, Margaret, you and your conspiracy theories? Marcus loves me. He's just a bit pragmatic. Margaret had merely shaken her head, a knowing, weary expression on her face. Pragmatism, dear, can be a very thin veil for greed. I should have listened. The day it all shattered began like any other. I returned from my morning walk, the familiar scent of blooming lilacs still clinging to my scarf, a fresh carton of milk in my grocery bag. As I pushed open my front door, I heard voices, bright and unfamiliar, echoing from my living room. At first, I thought Marcus had stopped by to check on me. A rare, unexpected treat. But then I heard her voice, Chloe's, all syrupy and bright, laced with an unsettling possessiveness. "And here's the kitchen," she chirped, her voice resonating with an almost theatrical enthusiasm. "You said the sunlight is great for staging, right?" I froze in the entryway, the grocery bag sliding slightly from my arm. My heart, usually a steady metronome, began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I saw them, Marcus in one of his stiff button-downs, Chloe with her fake nails wrapped around a Starbucks cup, and a smiling woman in heels, a real estate agent, walking through my apartment like they were on HGTV, discussing renovations, talking about my home as if it were an empty stage for their future. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just watched a ghost in my own home. Chloe opened the cabinet under my sink without asking. Marcus pointed toward the wall where Arthur's military photo still hung, a cherished relic of a loving past. "This whole section could come out," he said, nodding like he'd already done the demolition in his head. Erasing Arthur, erasing me, erasing our life, all in one dismissive gesture. Finally, the realtor, a woman with a practiced, saccharine smile, asked, "And your mom's okay with the timing?" That's when Marcus looked over and saw me standing there, still holding the damn milk. He didn't flinch, not a flicker of surprise or remorse. His face was a mask of calculated indifference, almost impatience. "Mom," he said, as if he'd just noticed a piece of furniture that had suddenly appeared. "We were going to tell you." He took a step closer, his voice dropping into a falsely solicitous tone. "But come on, be honest. You're going to die soon anyway. You've had a good run, right? It just makes sense. You have no stairs, great lighting, and we really need a space for the baby." "There is no baby," I heard myself say, my voice a thin, reedy whisper, barely audible, but sharp, with the pain of 1,000 cuts. "There isn't even a pregnancy yet. Just a Pinterest board and a desperation to play house." My mind reeled. They were planning to take my home for a hypothetical child, a figment of Chloe's online aesthetic. No one stopped talking. No one asked if I was okay. Marcus just kept pacing, gesturing at walls, while Chloe told the realtor they'd have it cleaned out in a month, maybe sooner, if I was cooperative. Cooperative, like I was a squatter in my own life, an inconvenient obstacle to their grand designs. I don't know how long I sat there, numb, paralyzed, on my own armchair, my gaze fixed on the dented corner of the coffee table, the one Marcus chipped when he was 6, pretending to be Batman. Eventually, they all left, their voices chattering down the hall about paint swatches and nursery themes. When the door closed behind them, the silence that followed was heavier than any grief, more profound than any loss. It was the silence of obliteration. That night, I poured myself a glass of red wine, turned off all the lights, and sat in the dark. My heart wasn't broken. It was something deeper, a quiet, still thing. I realized I was never really seen, not by them. I was a convenience, a stepping stone. And now that they thought I had nothing left to give, they were ready to erase me. That was the night I stopped being afraid of dying. That was the night I started planning. The next morning, I woke up at 6, same as always. Made my coffee, fed Jasper, and sat at the kitchen table. staring at the spot where Chloe had stood, holding her overpriced coffee like she'd already moved in. I wasn't sad anymore. I felt something else. Steady, cold, focused. As an art restorer, I understood the art of deception, of layers hidden beneath the obvious. I knew I had to protect myself, not just emotionally, but legally. If they were bold enough to parade a realtor through my home while I was still living there, then they were capable of far worse. They would, I realized with chilling clarity, try to declare me incompetent, to get power of attorney, to liquidate my assets and place me in a facility. I began my counter-strategy with the meticulous precision of an art restorer examining a suspected forgery. I dug through my drawer of old electronics until I found the tiny voice recorder Marcus had bought me years ago when I'd said I might start writing a memoir. I charged it, tested it, and the next time Marcus and Chloe came over, I made sure it was rolling, hidden inside my purse, zipped half open on the floor near the couch. Marcus didn't even knock when he entered, just walked in like he was already on the lease. Chloe trailing behind with her shiny new haircut and some fake smile she must have practiced in the mirror. "We just want to help you, Mom," Marcus said, as if that line was supposed to absolve him of everything. "It's not safe for you to be living alone. What if you fall? What if you forget the stove?" I asked if he remembered the last time I'd forgotten anything. He didn't answer. Instead, Chloe sighed and took out her phone. "We've been looking into assisted living," she said, scrolling like she was booking me a hotel. "Just short-term until we figure out long-term care options." That was the moment I knew. They weren't planning to wait for me to die. They were planning to shove me into a facility, claim I was losing my mind, and take everything while I was still breathing. I smiled politely and nodded, told them I'd think about it. Then I walked them to the door, waved them off like a sweet old lady who didn't know better. As soon as their car turned the corner, I yanked the recorder out of my purse and played it back. Every word was there. Chloe's patronizing tone, Marcus's fake concern, and their entire plan laid out like a blueprint. I emailed the file to myself, saved it to 2 flash drives, and hid them in different drawers around the apartment, just in case. This was my hidden layer, the truth beneath their polished facade. That same day, I called Margaret. We met for tea at her place, a cozy bungalow filled with books and the scent of Earl Grey. I told her everything. What they said, what they did, how they acted like I was already gone. She didn't say much at first, just kept sipping from her mug and listening with those sharp eyes she's always had, eyes that had seen countless manipulations in her years as a prosecutor. Then she reached into her filing cabinet and pulled out a business card. "He helped my sister when her kids tried to do the same thing," she said. The card was for a lawyer named David Levinson. He specialized in elder law and financial abuse. I called him the next day. David didn't talk to me like I was some clueless old woman. He talked to me like a client, with respect and understanding. He told me to start documenting everything, to not sign anything, and most importantly, to not let on that I was preparing for a fight. That night, I tucked the recorder back in my purse, triple-checked my locks, and started a folder on my desktop labeled Groceries so no one would look twice if they found it. Inside that folder, I started collecting proof. Because if my own son was going to try and erase me, I was going to make damn sure I had receipts. My art restorer's mind, accustomed to cataloging every pigment and brushstroke, was now applied to every betrayal. A week after I met with David, I walked down to the building office to ask about renewing my lease early, just to keep things secure. But the minute I stepped inside and said my name, the assistant manager, a young woman named Sarah, gave me this weird pause, like she didn't know what to say. "You're not on the lease anymore," she said finally, flipping through her clipboard like the paper could explain it better. I felt a jolt in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, even though I could feel the blood rushing behind my ears. She hesitated again, then pulled out the lease record and turned it toward me. It had Marcus's name on it, only his. My name had been crossed out in pen, crossed out like I was a note someone didn't need anymore. I told her that had to be a mistake, and she nodded nervously, said she'd have to talk to the building supervisor, but I could tell from her eyes that this wasn't a new development. I walked home slow, like my knees had aged 20 years in 10 minutes. When I got to my apartment, I opened every drawer, every file folder, searching for the last lease copy I signed. And there it was. My signature, dated, still legal. I took photos, scanned it, and sent it to David immediately. He called back within the hour, his voice steady, but sharper now. "This is fraud," he said. "They can't legally remove you without your consent, especially if you're still paying rent." I told him I was, every month, on time, from my own account. "Then we've got grounds," he said. "But don't confront them yet. Let them keep thinking they're getting away with it." That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there in the dark, watching the hallway shadows stretch across the ceiling, and thought about how many little ways Marcus had probably been preparing this takeover. The fake concern, the sudden interest in my prescriptions, the constant checking in about bills. It wasn't kindness, it was inventory. He'd been treating me like a dying business he was waiting to liquidate. The next morning, I checked my mail and found a flyer slipped between bills for a local estate planner. I knew immediately it wasn't random. The company was the same one Chloe had mentioned during their last visit, the one her cousin worked for. That's when I realized they were probably hoping to push me into early planning, not for my sake, but so they could control every asset before I even got a funeral. I threw the flyer in the trash, then took out my savings book from the fireproof box under my bed. I had enough to make moves if I had to. Not rich, but I'd been smart, careful, quiet about what I had. I started writing a list that night. Everything I owned that could be sold quickly, everything with resale value, everything they might try to touch, jewelry, antiques, even Arthur's rare coin collection, tucked behind the bookshelf. I wasn't going to wait for them to take it. I was going to disappear with it. And when they came looking for my things, they'd find nothing but air and memories they didn't deserve to keep. By the end of that week, I had a plan. Not perfect, not polished, but good enough to move in silence while they kept thinking I was some forgetful old woman who still used a flip phone and didn't know how online banking worked. My art restorer's hands were used to painstaking invisible work. This was no different. The first thing I did was go through my jewelry box and separate everything into 3 piles. Things I wore often that they'd expect to see, things I could pawn without anyone noticing, and sentimental pieces I would never sell, no matter how desperate I got. Then I took the second pile and drove 3 towns over to a quiet little pawn shop I remembered from years back, run by a woman named Clara, who once complimented my sapphire brooch at church. She didn't ask questions, just appraised each item with a careful eye and handed me a thick envelope of cash without even blinking. I left with just a receipt and a quiet heartbeat that told me I'd crossed into new territory. After that, I listed some of the furniture on a private resale site under a fake name. Just the big pieces I could live without, like the glass cabinet Marcus always said was outdated, and the vintage lamp Chloe kept side-eyeing like she was already planning where to put it. They sold fast, no questions asked, and I scheduled pickups when I knew Marcus wouldn't be visiting. With every transaction, I felt lighter, like I was peeling off layers of their expectations. I even sold the piano no one had touched in 20 years except for the cleaner. That one hurt a little, a pang of nostalgia for forgotten melodies, but not enough to make me stop. I started taking inventory of my bank accounts next, closing 2 of them and moving everything into a new, high-security account David helped me open under a trust name. It was a pain getting all the paperwork right, but it meant Marcus couldn't find it, touch it, or even know it existed unless I told him, which I never would. I cleared out the safe deposit box too, the one in the bank downtown that Marcus didn't even know I had. I moved its contents, old bonds, personal letters, and Arthur's watch, to Margaret's house in a locked case. She didn't ask questions, just poured me tea and nodded like she'd been waiting for this version of me to show up. Then I called the realtor. Not the one from before. This time I picked a woman named Lydia, who worked solo and specialized in quiet sales. I told her I wanted to list the apartment discreetly. No open houses, no signs, just serious offers. She was efficient, respectful, and didn't blink when I said I wanted it done fast. Clean sale, no hand-holding, I told her. I want to be gone before anyone realizes I'm leaving. She gave me a look like she understood exactly who I was escaping from. By the end of the month, the listing was live under a coded ID, and the showings were scheduled only when I was out for errands or appointments. I kept Marcus and Chloe completely in the dark. When they visited, I made sure the place looked the same. Same throw pillows, same family photos. Even though most of what they were seeing was now an illusion, the cabinets were nearly empty. The closet had half its clothes. The bookshelves were down to decoys. They didn't notice. They never noticed anything unless it benefited them. What they didn't realize was that the apartment they were standing in wasn't mine anymore. Not emotionally, not spiritually, and soon, not legally. I was already gone. They were just talking to a ghost in a familiar chair. I had just finished finalizing the sale agreement when Margaret called and asked me to come over for tea again, her voice low and different, like she was holding something back. And when I got there, I could tell she'd been sitting with whatever it was for a while, because she already had 2 cups poured and a manila envelope sitting dead center on the coffee table, like it was watching us. I sat down, feeling the usual comfort of her living room. Same crochet blanket draped over the armrest, same cat snoozing in the corner, but the air was heavier than usual, like we were about to step into something we couldn't walk back from. And Margaret didn't waste time. She slid the envelope toward me and said, "You deserve to know everything before you leave," which hit me like a sideways slap because I hadn't told her I was leaving yet. Not really. Not officially. But I guess old friends feel these things. I opened the envelope slowly, half afraid of what was inside, and pulled out a stack of papers. The first one was a birth certificate. Not Marcus's, but his mother's. I looked at Margaret, confused. Arthur's first wife, Margaret clarified, her voice gentle. He was married before, briefly, to a woman named Claire. She had a child before they met, a boy, gave him up for adoption. My breath hitched. Marcus? Margaret nodded, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. He was born 3 months before Arthur and Claire's wedding was called off. Arthur never knew. Claire kept it a secret. She put him up for adoption, then vanished. Arthur met your mother a year later, and the rest, as they say, is history. I stared at the documents. Adoption papers, old letters between Claire and her sister, carefully preserved and anonymously sent to Margaret by a distant relative after Claire's passing. Letters detailing Claire's desperate decision, her fear, her secret, a photograph of a baby, swaddled in a pale blue blanket, eerily familiar. The shock was a cold wave, washing over me, leaving me breathless. All those years, all those memories, all the love I had poured into Marcus, thinking he was Arthur's biological son, thinking he was a continuation of our love story. And he wasn't. He was a secret, a past that Arthur never knew, a life I had unknowingly built on a foundation of omission. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because it changes everything," Margaret said. "You were never obligated. Not by blood, not by law. You chose to be his mother. And now, he's chosen to discard you." The truth, when it came, was a double-edged sword. It severed the last vestiges of my emotional attachment to Marcus, revealing the ultimate betrayal. Not just his greed, but the fundamental lie of our connection. The hurt was immense, a deeper wound than I could have imagined. But with it came a strange, liberating clarity. I wasn't just escaping an abusive son. I was reclaiming a life that had, in a subtle way, always been tied to a phantom past. The next day, with David's help, I expedited the sale of the apartment. The money from the sale, combined with the funds from the jewelry and furniture, went into my new trust account, tucked away in a remote bank in a different state. My old life, meticulously dismantled, was now neatly packaged and ready to be shed. I bought a small, cozy bungalow in a charming, artistic community nestled by the coast in Maine, far from Maplewood, far from Marcus and Chloe's grasp. It was smaller than my old apartment, but it had a vast, light-filled studio that overlooked the ocean, a perfect space for my art restoration work and for finding a new canvas for my own life. I shipped my essential tools, a few cherished books, and Jasper's favorite cat tree. Everything else, all the furniture, the remaining art, the remnants of a life I was leaving behind, I donated to local charities. The day I left Maplewood, I left no forwarding address, no note, no explanation. Marcus and Chloe had sought to erase me from their lives. I simply beat them to it, leaving them to face the emptiness they had created. The explosion of their world was not immediate, but it was inevitable. When Marcus and Chloe finally arrived at my apartment, full of self-congratulatory smugness, armed with eviction notices and plans for cleaning out the old stuff, they found an empty space, a hollow shell. The shock, I heard through Margaret's discreet inquiries, she still had friends in the local legal circles, was palpable. They tried to contest the lease, but David had already filed a preemptive lawsuit armed with my recorded conversations and the original lease agreement. The building management, now fully aware of their fraudulent attempts, cooperated with David, providing all necessary documentation to clear my name and expose Marcus's forgery. The legal battle that ensued was swift and brutal. Marcus's attempt to claim the apartment was dismissed, and he was slapped with charges of lease fraud and attempted elder abuse, thanks to David's relentless work and my carefully gathered evidence. Chloe, implicated as an accessory, saw her carefully curated social media career crumble as news of the scandal spread through their elite circles. Their dream home, my apartment, became a symbol of their avarice, forever out of reach. The financial consequences for them were devastating. Marcus's company, built on a foundation of image and ruthless ambition, saw its stock plummet as investors, wary of his legal troubles and ethical lapses, pulled out their capital. His personal bank accounts were frozen, his assets investigated for connections to any other potential schemes. Chloe's influencer status was ruined, her brand of effortless perfection exposed as a hollow sham. They lost their lavish Silicon Valley home, their expensive cars, and their carefully cultivated social standing. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to take my modest assets, they had lost their vast fortune. Marcus tried to find me, of course. He called Margaret, desperate, enraged, then pleaded, "Where is she? Does she know what she's done?" Margaret, ever loyal, simply told him, "Eleanor is where she needs to be, and she knows exactly what she's done." He even hired a private investigator. But by then, I was long gone, a phantom in the wind, leaving no trace. He eventually filed for bankruptcy, his career in tatters, his marriage to Chloe reportedly unraveling under the weight of their shared disgrace. The baby, that hypothetical child they'd wanted my apartment for, never materialized. Their grand plans dissolved into bitter recriminations. I felt no triumph in their ruin, only a quiet, weary satisfaction that justice, in its own slow, methodical way, had prevailed. The revelation about Marcus's true parentage was a separate ache, a personal wound that would take time to heal, but it also offered a strange kind of freedom. My love for him had been unconditional, born of choice, not obligation. Now, that choice was rescinded, not by me, but by his own actions. My new life in Maine unfolded with a gentle rhythm. The bungalow, though small, was filled with sunlight and the salty tang of the ocean air. My studio became my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the intricate details of restoration, bringing beauty back to life, one delicate stroke at a time. I took on smaller, more meaningful projects, working with local galleries and private collectors who valued artistry over profit. I found solace in the quiet hum of my tools, the vibrant colors of my pigments, and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. Jasper, my faithful companion, thrived in the new environment, chasing seagulls on the beach and napping in sunbeams. I joined a local art collective, made new friends, kindred spirits who shared my passion for creativity and the quiet pursuit of beauty. I even started painting for myself again, landscapes inspired by the rugged Maine coast, portraits of the weathered faces of local fishermen, capturing stories not found in grand museums but in everyday life. My hands, once focused on others' legacies, were now creating my own. I never regretted my decision. I learned that kindness, when practiced at the cost of self-destruction, is not a virtue but a vulnerability. I learned that some bonds, even those of blood, are not worth preserving if they demand the sacrifice of your dignity, your peace, your very self. My son and his wife had sought to bury me alive, to erase my existence for their own gain. Instead, I had resurrected myself, stronger and more whole than ever before. The scars of betrayal remained, faint but present, reminders of the battle fought and won. But they were overshadowed by the profound sense of peace, self-worth, and unshakable freedom I had found. I learned that true strength isn't about being unscarred, but about how you carry your scars, how you transform pain into purpose. The message I carry, the wisdom etched into my very soul, is this: never let others define your worth, never allow kindness to be mistaken for weakness, and never ever let anyone take what is rightfully yours, your dignity, your peace, your self-respect, just because they are called family. Sometimes, the most powerful act of love is also the most powerful act of self-preservation. When you finally stand your ground, when you dare to say no to injustice, even when it comes from your own blood, you don't just reclaim your property or your finances. You reclaim control over your entire life. And that, I assure you, is the most profound victory of all. I had given them what they truly deserved, the opportunity to live with the consequences of their own choices, unburdened by my silent strength. And in doing so, I had finally given myself what I truly deserved: a life lived on my own terms, free and whole. The silence they sought to impose on me became the very space where my truth could finally, gloriously bloom.